Welcome to a new episode of the Cinema Shame podcast. My name is James Patrick. I'm not on this episode, so I took the liberty of introducing Allan talking to somebody. Honestly, I don't even remember why I couldn't make this episode. I really just came on here to say thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting Cinema Shame over the last 6-7 years, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. It's been a while. And if you've been along with us on any part of this ride, please consider leaving us a kindly review on your podcast platform of choice. I need some more people to cancel out the guy that gave us a really crappy review because he said our audio levels sucked. Your audio levels sucked, guy, not mine. Okay, sorry about that. And it might feel like the world really kind of sucks right now, because it does. Things are hard. I'm struggling myself. But the one thing we'll always have is movies. We love movies. We love talking about movies. It keeps us going through times that are less than ideal. Tell a friend about Cinema Shame. Keep spreading the word. Keep challenging yourself through cinema. Read more. Talk to other humans about movies, music, literature. Get out there and be a part of our communities, in person or online. Since Twitter is now a hell site, you can find Allan and I over on Blue Sky, where everything is sunnier. No one is telling me to cope. And the biggest Blue Sky meme has to do with sensual Alf. I've done enough talking. You came here to listen about movies, not whatever this is. And now, Allan has a fantastic conversation with Stephen Rebello, yes, that's Stephen Rebello, about Elia Kazan's On the Waterfront. See, I lied. I listened to the episode. I guess I lied twice because now I'm also on the episode I'm not on. Enjoy the show.
Hi, and welcome to a very special episode of Cinema Shame. James isn't able to join us today, so I'm your solo host, Allan Mott. And if you, like me, were a movie-obsessed teen in the 1990s, then much of what you knew about what was happening in the medium you loved didn't come from that new thing called the internet, but instead from print publications. At the time, there were basically two film-specific choices that you could find at virtually every newsstand: Premiere and Movie Line. Of the two, Movie Line was easily the coolest and most appealing to those of us who are happy to acknowledge the absurdities of our obsession. Found in the back pages of Movie Line was a regular column shared by Stephen Rebello and Edward Margulies called Bad Movies We Love. As its title indicates, it was dedicated to highlighting fabulous film efforts that were easy to embrace despite their very obvious and undeniable faults. In the autumn of 1993, I found a copy of the book version of Bad Movies We Love at my university bookstore while shopping for my first-year textbooks. Most of those textbooks would end up never being opened, much less read, but I thumbed my way through Margulies and Rebello's book countless times in the years that followed. Well, it wasn't the first book to explore the world of unsuccessful cinema. It was the first to do so with an air of genuine affection rather than disdainful superiority. Unlike the Medveds, whose books dripped with a kind of venom, mockery, and smug self-satisfaction that you'd expect from the kind of dudes who eventually write stuff like, slavery wasn't as terrible as people say it was, the most important part of Rebello and Margulies' title wasn't the bad, but the love. Sadly, Edward Margulies' untimely passing kept us from ever enjoying more books in what could have been a very entertaining series. But Stephen Rebello has, throughout his career, dedicated himself to writing books defined by his love of cinema and Hollywood history. Perhaps his most famous work is his 1990 book, Alfred Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho, which was adapted into Sasha Gevrese's 2012 film, Hitchcock. In 2020, he took on another cinematic phenomenon with Dolls, 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 his epic examination of the journey Jacqueline Suzanne's Valley of the Dolls went from surprise bestseller to one of Hollywood's greatest camp classics. This November, he returns with A City Full of Hawks, which examines the making of Elia Kazan's iconic On the Waterfront, which he has graciously joined us to talk about today. Now, obviously, this isn't his cinema shame. It would be very weird for him to write a whole book about a movie he's never actually seen. Although I do think I have read some books by other authors that fit that description. No, it's my cinema shame, since despite its obvious importance and influence on cinema, I only watched it for the first time last night. Thanks for being here, Stephen.
My pleasure. And I have a little guilty secret to share with you.
Yeah.
And since I talk about it in the introduction to the book, I think it's fair game. I avoided seeing this movie for a really, really long time because in my head, it was super important with a big I. And it had lessons to tell. And I wasn't having any of that. So it took me a very long time. And, you know, as the book talks about too, my dad was a mill worker, and he got involved in some activities, the anti-union activities that sort of parallel what happened in the movie. So it was a double whammy, you know, the whole idea of approaching this movie. But once I saw it, I was pretty overwhelmed by it, and was a bit ashamed for having avoided it so long.
Well, and it's really funny you saying that, because the first question we usually ask is, you know, why did it take you so long to watch the movie? And since this is a reverse one where it's my cinema shame, the answer you just gave is the answer why it took me like until yesterday to watch this movie. Because prior to this, the only Elia Kazan movie I'd ever watched was A Face in the Crowd, which makes sense because as someone who is like obsessed with media as I am, that is the one Kazan movie you are going to watch. But I had avoided the rest because I always, as someone who, you know, loves the like the artifice of Hollywood more than anything else, the idea of making films that are aspiring to be realistic to me is more like, yeah, no, that's great for you, but that's not for me. For me, On the Waterfront represented very much that idea. Plus, I always feel like, well, I've already seen the three key scenes. Like I've seen him on on the swing talking to Eva Marie Saint. I've seen the I Could Have Been a Contender scene with Rod Steiger, and I've seen the ending. So like, what else is there to that movie? But it turns out there is a lot more to that movie. But also, I think it's a film that is important to watch for historical reasons, but also like in examining like sort of like the motivations of a filmmaker, because I think it's a case where On the Waterfront is a very great movie that probably wasn't made for very good reasons.
So it's great to be doing this interview with you because the timing is so great.
Yeah.
And your motivations are so interesting. And so we sort of share a guilty secret in that way. How did you make out with it, having seen the film?
I mean, it's one of those cases where like I 100% understand why it is the film it is. It wasn't a case of coming to a classic and going, is that it? Is that why people, like, I don't get it. Like, I got it. But at the same time, there were things like that for me, just knowing the history and knowing like Kazan, like despite not having watched his films, where I was, like, like I'm not sure about that choice. Like I'm not sure about like it was like it didn't play like a masterpiece to me. Like there were definitely faults to it that I found were there. How about like when you first watch it?
I don't know if there's a perfect movie. And
yeah,
so,
well, 100%.
What you call faults, I may see as glories. But, one of the things, we can check it out to see if you had any of this reaction. But, when you read the book, you'll I think, appreciate the fact that the roots of the movie, strangely enough, or maybe not so strangely enough, are really the gangster movies of the 1930s. Yeah. The James Cagney and Paul Muni and the Edward G. Robinson kind of thing. And that's very strong in the movie. I mean, the death of Rod Steiger is done as graphically as it would have been done in any gangster movie of its era. Maybe not in the 30s, where things were a little looser before the code. But it definitely has its roots in melodrama, definitely has its roots in the gangster genre. And I don't know if you've ever seen a movie called Going My Way, but it was a Frank Capra movie that was very, 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 very important and very popular at its time, about a priest in a really tough neighborhood. And they kept advertising this movie as and I love Hollywood advertising, as you know, but they kept calling this movie Going My Way with
dock workers?
With what?
With dock workers or?
No, not with dock workers, but with brass knuckles.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Yeah.
So and you can kind of see that, and
well, especially because you got Carl Malden in there playing an actual priest.
Yeah, playing a priest was based on a real life priest as well. I think that character was the real reason why Bud Schulberg wanted to write this movie. It wasn't so much Terry. It was the priest he always thought was the most important, because that man made such an impact on his life. And I find, some of Carl Malden speechifying a bit, how shall I put it, insufferable. And I think that Carl Malden is a very good actor, and I think he had a lot of bluster and he needed to be calmed down sometimes. And I don't think Kazan wanted to do that with him. But all I'm saying is that although it's a really important movie and broke a lot of barriers and really introduced a whole kind of different acting style to films, it really has its roots in very, very populist kinds of Hollywood movies.
I feel like that's sort of the strange sort of dichotomy of Kazan's career, is that he has this reputation as being the important filmmaker who, put the method on film and gave us Marlon Brando. But if you look at actual, sort of like the one-line plots of the films, they do have a very sort of populist entertainment sort of like thing, like Splendor of the Glass is two teenagers go crazy because they're so horny for each other. Like that's not a serious important subject, but at the same time he elevates it, and I think that's sort of like the cornerstone of like sort of the Kazan brand.
Well, I think that's a pretty astute. He elevates it to opera almost, because it's the emotions are very operatic in the way they're presented and the way they're written and the way they're played. And I think I find Splendor in the Grass irresistible. I just think it's so swoony and so romantic that it brings out the 14-year-old girl in me. So, I mean, I think a number of us had a Bud in our lives. I certainly did. And so I can really understand Natalie Wood's getting weak in the knees, and the terrible repression that she's facing from her parents. I mean, the bathtub scene that people talk about, and they should talk about, is pretty extraordinary. It's about as raw as you can get, and it was really Natalie Wood not just showing the world that she could act, but letting out some stuff that was very painful to her. And it's very obvious that it's real and not just gunning for the Oscar. So you're right. There's a really interesting strain of hokum and entertainment in Kazan and Schmaltz that is it's very real and very vital, and he doesn't do much to hide it. I mean, Baby Doll is insane. You might want to check out Baby Doll.
After watching this, I think I am going to go on, because even like just talking about Splendor in the Grass, like literally the only scene I've seen is the bathtub scene. I feel like prior to doing this, if you were to ask me like what film I feel guilty about not seeing from Kazan, I would have said Splendor in the Grass before I said On the Waterfront. And I think, again, like now I'm definitely going to go on and it's good we have a podcast that's all about that, because now that gives me a bunch of movies to watch, and we can do episodes on. We can do a whole Kazan season.
I'll be listening and watching for those. I love, as you can imagine from bad movies we love, I love 50s swinging for the fences melodramas. because when they're good, they're really nuts.
And when
There's
they're
Splendor in
bad,
the
they're
Grass.
just really entertaining.
Yeah, they are. And in Splendor in the Grass, they're not kidding around. I mean, it's very sexual, it's very sensual. And I'm sure that for many people seeing it today, that felt like, what's with all this sexual hysteria? Why don't they just, do
Do
it?
it.
That's not the way the world was
Yeah.
then. I mean, it's a movie that's, set way before the 1960s, but just everything seems 1960s with the haircuts and all of that. But I wish you well with it. I think you're going to have a good time.
Well, and I think like there's an element of that sort of same kind of tension in On the Waterfront with
Absolutely.
Brando and Eva Marie saying like my one note like about Brando's performances, because I run very hot and cold on Brando. Like there are
Mhm.
moments where I'm like I totally understand, why he was as revered as he was, and then like we'll come across a movie like The Nightcomers, which I think of all the movies I've watched for Cinema Shame was the one I hated the most,
Mhm.
and Brando was a major reason for that.
Yeah,
But
understood.
but there were like I like every time he tried to put something into Eva Marie Saint's mouth, I was just like, leave her alone. Like, what are you doing? And it's a very much a case of like them having to explore something in a way that feels very different in today's context. Like especially her character, where they have her basically, spending all of her times with nuns at her school, and how that basically like is symbolic of her innocence. And
Uh-huh.
I think that is something that, is very relevant to the movie then, but now I think that's one of the things that adds, if there is a dated aspect on the waterfront, I think that's one of the things that works against it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Of course, the way the role was written made it very, very hard to cast,
Yeah.
for one thing. Where do you find innocence in the 50s? Where do you find it now? Uh, and the person had to stand up to Brando,
Mhm.
had to be maybe of not equal status, but certainly able to hold her own in those scenes, if not dominate the scenes. And I think a lot of what you see is a lot of what was going on off camera. That I think maybe Brando and maybe Kazan in some ways saw her in that way. Uh, there's a letter that you'll see in the book where Kazan confesses that he thinks the role is quite ridiculous and says so, that her role is really quite ridiculous, but she's quite good in it. But there was a very interesting, I think, sexual game of tension going on
Mhm.
between them. That I think that Brando was probably at a height of being physically attractive and knowing it,
Oh yeah.
and like everyone on that set, I think probably would have wanted to sleep with it. And I think he was very canny in finding those tender spots in even Marie Saint that actually helped her performance tremendously, even though she was already really good. He disarmed her and kept her off balance right from the first time they auditioned together. And I think he picked up her skirt and I mean,
He did his Brando stuff.
well, yeah, I mean, he did what was expected of him
Yeah.
and what was expected of the role. That this is a guy who's aware that women find him attractive, not in the brutish kind of Stanley Kowalski way of Streetcar, a role that he despised because I think he thought that people thought that's who he was, an
Yeah.
inarticulate brute, and he was anything but. But I think with even Marie Saint, he saw her as someone sort of on a pedestal, and he needed to knock her down so that that at least she could be. He could see that there was someone vibrant and sexual underneath, and that wasn't something all directors were able to bring out in her. And I mean, Hitchcock did,
Yeah.
but I think that Kazan may be, just second in line there in terms of, letting her show the fire underneath the ice.
Yeah, it was actually kind of difficult for me to reconcile like the Eva Marie Saint I know from like North by Northwest with the one in On the Waterfront. They feel like very different creatures in a way. I was actually shocked. The biggest thing I was shocked when I was like sort of looking them up after I watched the movie was like she was almost 30 when this was made.
Right.
And so because like her character, like she really does a good job of sort of selling this, like I'm, this young girl from, from this like basically convent school
Yeah.
who is back, in town to, you know, visit her family. And yeah, no, it took me like a while after that to like realize that, yeah, no, she really managed to like not, 'cause especially like back in 1954, like if you were 29, you might as well have been, 50 today. Like the difference in,
Yeah.
how people aged back then and their maturity levels. I feel like that was the thing that generally shocked me.
Well, especially if you're a woman, it's
Yeah,
easier, slightly easier, or maybe way easier for men.
yeah,
But yeah, I mean, but how brilliant of Hitchcock to see in
yeah,
something like On the Waterfront that there was a really interesting sort of sexual fire
yeah,
that was just kind of waiting to be kindled, or whatever sexist term you want to, an inappropriate term, because anything is inappropriate term that you want to apply to it. But I think that, and she said it, that he kept her off balance during the audition, and he never stopped keeping her off balance. Clearly, she had no idea that when they were rehearsing what's now called the glove scene in the
yeah.
park, he was going to do anything with the glove except maybe pick it up and just give it back to her. But for him to make a sexual overture of it with putting his hand in the glove, I mean, it's very, very sensual. And it's very instinctive. And so that for an actor, that's really exciting when you don't
Yeah.
know what the person you're playing with is going to do with the lines it's written, or the space between you is sort of circumscribed. And
Did Kazan give them a lot of room to improvise, or did they stick really closely to Schulberg's script?
once, it's a good question. He saw them rehearsing that scene, and right down to her dropping the glove, which was a complete accident on Eva
Yeah,
Marie's part. Um, and he saw what Brando did with it and how she reacted to it. It was still fresh, and he said, "Don't change anything. Do it just that way." Um, there were many times when he and Brando would come to loggerheads because Brando was untamed, again, very instinctive. He would like to do things his way because he felt that he knew his guy. He knew those guys, and Kazan was very bright too. He also knew when someone was giving a lot of energy and whether they were improving the scene by what they brought to it, or what they brought to it that day in that
yeah.
moment. So more times than not, he let Brando have his sway, because it was always, as Kazan said, better than what he had come up with himself. So in the face of that kind of genius, you're crazy if you keep bucking it. You can't put a stopper on it anyway. And when it's good, let it go crazy.
Well,
Their scenes together are definitely electric.
one of the last episodes we just recorded was for Nashville, and we were talking about how basically the genius of that movie is that it's perfectly cast. And I think that's like a good director understands that, if you've cast the right actor in the role, then you let the actor, live in the role. You don't try and force them into what you've already imagined and try, give them line readings and, say like, I think, yeah, with Brando, especially with Brando, because, he was so volatile that sort of, if you were like doing that, you were basically saying, I don't want you. Like, and if you
Yeah.
didn't want Brando, then don't have Brando because
Yeah, exactly. Well, and Brando was also happy because he had Carl Malden with him, and they'd worked together before, and they'd shared a dressing room before. And Carl Malden tells stories about how Brando got bored doing Streetcar almost immediately, because all
yeah,
the good stuff had happened in rehearsal,
yeah,
and then it was just like,
just a job.
basically he said at one point, "Oh, every night I have to go fucking rape Jessica Tandy again," and so Brando would do things like, one night he decided to hire a gypsy violinist who played in the dressing room. And he would bring these, I'm not going to say street people, but he would bring very unusual people into his life and bring them into the dressing room. And kept everybody, especially people like Jessica Tandy, who were so classically trained and so precise in what they did. She despised him. She just couldn't bear, being around him, because, he would do things on stage, like during a scene, just smash a bottle onto a table and cut his hand and play the scene, but that kind of electricity was very, very potent, especially in the 50s. We'd seen it. I mean, I always see people like Cagney as predecessors of Brando, because there was just an electricity to him, and you're never really sure what's going to come out of him, and a street sense of him. But of course, Brando was obsessed with Montgomery Clift. He thought he was making all the best movie choices and making the best decisions, and there's always somebody over there that you'd rather be. And for Brando, that was kind of constant, because he was so battered by his parents. An alcoholic mother whom he adored, and a really abusive, uncommunicative, money-mad father, who just told him he was nothing again and again. It sounds maudlin to think that someone lives their life at the effect of that, but I mean, if you know any people.
Oh yeah, no, that's everybody is the product of their childhood. I don't think that's you can transcend your childhood, but it will always affect you. Like, I think that's just the reality for everybody.
Right. And one of the things I really enjoy about doing these books, and it comes up every time I do one of these, is I love to talk about who else was going to be in the movie instead of, because to me it's fascinating to think what that.
Oh, the what ifs are always more fascinating than anything else. I think
so. I think so. And of course, with this one, Paul Newman had the inside track, and he auditioned, and the producer, Sam Spiegel, who is a real star in the book, by the way.
Oh, okay. That's going to be great.
He's just so bigger than life.
Yeah.
He couldn't see it. And of course, Paul Newman auditioned with Joanne Woodward.
Yeah.
And with She Is the Possibility for Edie. And, Kazan, I think, rightly thought that she was good, but not at
that level.
Nor was, I think, for the right reasons, Elizabeth Montgomery. Although,
I honestly, though, would love to have seen that, because one of my pet theories was that were it not for Bewitched, Elizabeth Montgomery should have had a much larger film career than she ultimately did, because I just find she's such a striking presence on screen, but once she got that television stamp on her, she just couldn't get rid of it.
Yes, I think she would have agreed with you. The thing about Elizabeth Montgomery is, although Kazan liked her, and he had Carl Malden rehearsing the actors, he said she looks like what she is, someone who's been brought up in Beverly Hills and went to very good schools, and it didn't work.
Yeah, no, I always saw her as more like Grace Kelly than Eva Marie Saint.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Well, I think, and Elizabeth Montgomery was nearly in Marnie. Speaking of Hitchcock, but not as Marnie as the sister-in-law of Sean Connery. But in terms of that casting, I think this is very
the Diane Baker part.
Yeah, okay. And she would have been fabulous.
Yeah,
and would have run away with the movie, of course, because she was that good. I think, but the thing about that casting is that it's very, very revealing of Kazan, who went after Grace Kelly. You see,
no, that would not work.
and Sam Spiegel really wanted her because they were friends, and she came in and she auditioned.
Well, also she would have been the much bigger star than an unknown like Eva Marie Saint. Like, or was this not quite at that yet? Yeah,
it was just
starting,
before. But
when was The Country Wife? That was around that time. Country Girl
came later. Yeah. But the casting thing is so interesting. I mean, initially it was Montgomery Clift who was going to do that, but really it was John Garfield who was going to do it, and he wanted too much money. And he didn't want to. I think he didn't want to strap himself into Kazan, frankly. because I just think that I don't think they would have been the best combination of people.
No, although I can definitely see like of like between like Newman, Brando, Cliff, and Garfield. I feel like if it hadn't gone to Brando, Garfield would have been the pick because he does have that sort of
Garfield would have
working
been my
class
pick.
everyman quality that Newman could sometimes like Newman try it a lot, but it was always like, yeah, I'm sorry, Paul, you're still the most beautiful human being on the planet. Like,
Yeah, but at that point, Paul Newman wasn't Paul Newman. He
oh
was
yeah,
he
he was
was
still
on he
like
was on Broadway in Picnic
yeah,
as an understudy. But there were actual negotiations. Well, how do we get him out? Because you're an understudy, you're still under
yeah,
contract.
yeah,
How do we get him out of that? But once again, I mean, I just found Kazan a fascinating, not particularly likable, but
yeah,
fascinating man in this. But because I see it as a movie already, this
yeah,
this story,
yeah.
um, and apparently so do other people. But more about that maybe another time. But, but the point that I'm trying to make is that Kazan had very commercial instincts. I think that's part of his blacklisting secret. He wanted to continue his career
Yeah.
and figured out a way to do it, and in my opinion, a despicable way, but the way that he chose, that was his path.
Well, and I wanted to get into that because I think for a lot of younger cinephiles, probably one of their main references to On the Waterfront is sort of Orson Welles, that famous clip from what 1980, I think was in Cannes or that, where he's asked about it and he basically says that, it's a despicable movie because it's basically, an informer defending an informer. And I think that's part of the reason why I avoided it for a while. Like when I think of Kazan, like the first memory I have, like of him as like an actual physical being as opposed to like
Mhm.
the person who directed these things is at the 1999 Oscars where he's this frail man who basically does like I think he even ends it with like can I go now at the end, like as if he's like a child asking for permission to leave the stage. But it's the image of like Warren Beatty giving him a standing ovation while like it was, Ed Harris and his wife are like sitting down with their arms crossed because there's the rat on stage, getting his award. And I think that really, like made me go like, do I want to watch this movie that is
Mhm.
essentially like a defense of a despicable act that
Yeah,
is
I
basically
understand.
made in a way that makes it seem like, well, it's heroic what I did. And like, no, no, yeah, it wasn't.
Well, yeah, I mean, clearly he was, I mean, unrepentant, if you want to use that
Yeah,
word, and
yeah,
felt quite justified with what he had done, as did Bud Schulberg
yeah.
himself. So um, I, I, I don't know what was going on in their minds, but they certainly, to all outward appearances, they looked as though they had made their peace with their decision and screw the rest of you. No matter how
Well,
many
he
lives
he
were ruined, how many careers were destroyed, how many people rarely worked again, or had to eke out a living in other kinds of ways. There were terrible repercussions for people.
well, his defense was always that, oh, they were going to be named anyway.
And the truth is that some of them had already been named
Yeah.
by other people. I don't really see though that that's a defense,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. No.
well,
No,
they
like
did it, so
yeah, yeah. No, you still agreed to participate in one of the, biggest, like well, I don't know what I'm trying to think of a good word to describe what HUAC was, but just how, actually detrimental to society and, especially the arts that it was. And
yes,
I think especially it's something that resonates now in today's modern climate, like where you get the sense that, we're only, one election away from having like more, HUAC style, like, let's blacklist these entire groups of people for the things they believe. Uh,
or
so
tweeted.
or tweeted, yeah, yeah. So I think that it is that in that way there is sort of a relevance to this film that is 70 years old, but it's also like there are. I was gonna say like the things that I didn't like about it. I felt because I'm knowing like sort of Kazan's sort of self-justification and why he's making this movie is that I found like the men that he cast as sort of the, like as like Cobb's like cronies and henchmen were so grotesque that like at a certain point I felt like Rondo Hatton was going to come in and
He wasn't available.
like even like I love Ed Gwynn, but I felt like just seeing him and the way like he's shot as this sort of like very tall, gaunt, almost zombie like figure is sort of like he's going out of his way to go like, see, Terry has to go against these guys because these guys are literally monsters.
Yeah.
And that felt like really like him just sort of egging the pudding and making it like much more of like, this isn't like a case of, one guy going against the corruption. This is a guy going against actual true evil.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, Terry is made to be a Christ-like figure, almost crucified. And
yeah,
that's pretty heavy-handed.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, some of the men that you're talking about, the Rondo Hatton type guys, the galoots, as I like to call them, were his favorite people on the movie. Kazan loved them. That's who he wanted to be. That's who he saw himself as, one of those guys, one of those ex-prize fighters, or, one of those ex-heavies that, always appears in, great movies, steals a scene, and then he's gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, clearly Terry is the identification figure for Kazan, and of course he casts one of the greatest looking men in movie history. And so there's more than a little hubris in that, but we're human, we're fallible. I mean, Hitchcock told me that he was shocked actually, anytime he looked in the reflection in a glass or in a shop going by, that he felt like he was Cary Grant, and then he saw he was just this short, not a particularly attractive man, and it was shocking and sad to him all the time. And I think that's part of the little boy in him that never felt okay, never felt like he should be at the big nice table. That's why, for example, the Joan Fontaine character in Rebecca, he so identifies with her that her discomfort and her gaucheness become palpable and sad and annoying all at once. We all think that we're the people that are so sophisticated and smart and strong that we could stand up to the Mrs. Danvers of the world. We're not.
No.
And so we tend to hate those people, but Hitchcock loved them because he felt he was one of those.
Well, and I think that's I think if you go through the list of directors, I think that in some way you're always going to find some sense of insecurity about something, someone like Warren Beatty, who is one of the most beautiful men in the history of Hollywood, would have been like, well, how much of my career is based on the fact of my beauty and not on my actual talent, and so I'm going to make these films that prove that I am like the an actual artist, as opposed to I'm going to produce Bonnie and Clyde and prove that I can but then he also does with The Only Game in Town, and so he had an uneven track record.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I have to say that I think Bonnie and Clyde is one of the great movies and one of the great entertainments. I mean, talk about a movie that shoots up on 30s Warner Brothers gangster movies.
Yeah,
I mean, it's all there. Only it's hotter and sexier and hipper.
Yeah,
and so I think he did pretty well for himself. But he had sometimes terrible taste in picking other movies for himself. And the things he had his girlfriends turned down too. There's the whole chapter that should be written about that. I mean, this was a difficult. On the Waterfront was a really difficult movie to make. Every studio turned it down. And I mean, literally every studio turned it down more than once.
Mm-hmm.
And they turned it down in the most insulting ways. Kazan had a contract with a deal with 20th Century Fox, and Darryl Zanuck said to him, "Why do you keep bringing me these stupid movies? Why don't you just make something nice? Why does it always have to be like a, big Storm and Drang, And, that's just who Kazan needed to be, But that story is quite beautiful, I think, in the book, because, you have these two guys, Kazan and Bud Schulberg, who had basically inherited the project from from other people in a sense. Bud Schulberg, who had worked on it with Robert Siodmak, the film noir director.
Yeah, I'm trying to think
So
if I can picture that in my head. Yeah, it would be
that movie.
the gangster
that
angle would be hit a lot harder, I think.
Exactly, and lots of shadows,
Yeah,
and lots of doom,
yeah,
feelings of impending doom, and fate's out to get me.
yeah.
They won't believe me, but
Probably no resurrection at the end of that one.
if there would have been a resurrection, it would have been a very dubious one.
Yeah,
And certainly all the guys wouldn't have gone back into the factory like, yeah,
yeah,
we're beating them. My dad saw that and had to take me aside when he saw the movie. We saw it together at one point, and he said, "You have to know right now that life is never like that. We're not the rich people, and so we will always get screwed over." And the crusader will always get crushed under the boot heel, whether it's the fascists, whether it's he went through all the experiences that he had seen, and he wasn't wrong. So I think one of the things about On the Waterfront is that ending in the hope of making a Hollywood entertainment, as Kazan wanted to do, that also had something to say, is hollow and unconvincing.
Just before we started, I was looking up because I know that Eva Marie Saint is still alive. She would be she just turned 100 a few months ago, and I was looking to see if any of the cast members, and I thought that if there was a best chance, it would have been one of the boys who are and it turns out that Tommy, I believe Tommy Handler, is still alive. He's around 84. No, he just passed away. He just passed away. Yeah, because there were articles like recently, it's like last year that were interviewing him.
Tough life.
But yeah, there was one where basically was saying like that. Yeah, no, he spent his life in that location on those docks, and things really aren't that different now than they were 70 years ago. That it's pretty much just as corrupt and pretty much the same then. Like it sounds like people are making a lot more money like if you are able to get in the union, but it's not like it's a case where getting in the union, especially if you're not a white guy, is very difficult.
Exactly. And there wasn't the shape up anymore where these poor guys would show up at the crack of dawn and get thrown these gold shits or whatever they were, silver, whatever they were, made of brass. And that was, and they were at the mercy and the favor of the union guys who were under the thumb of the goons. So certainly Tommy had a life where he knew that his father had been killed for being a stool pigeon for the right reasons. And he didn't have a great education, he didn't have a great life, and he got used by a lot of women who just wanted to sleep with a movie star, but mostly he got ridden by people at his co-workers who just thought and told him, you're a guy that had a chance in the movies to be a movie actor, and you weren't good enough. And they told him that all his life, that he blew his golden chance to be a star. Brando tried to help him; he got him an agent, but nothing really happened. Nothing really happened for anybody because of that movie.
The most recent episode we put up is an audio essay I actually created a while ago when I was going to do my own podcast. And it's basically premised on the idea of that I find that the IMDb is the saddest website on the internet, because you'll just see like, oh, this is where their dream of a Hollywood career started. And then you just see the progression, and you see like, oh, that's when they had their hit, that's when they had their flop, and that's when their career ended. And
it's how it started, how it's
how
going.
it ended. And like the example I bring up is, I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Helen Wood from Give a Girl a Break, and how she went from that to co-starring in Deep Throat 19 years later. And it's sort of like, to me, it's sort of that's the encapsulation of like, you can have this amazing break, but that doesn't mean it's going to lead anywhere. And I think that's something that people don't realize.
You can be really good, and it doesn't happen. I mean, there are careers you go on and on. I once sat at dinner with the actress Nina Foch, of all people, and she was just a straight shooter. And, we were talking about how somebody becomes a William Holden and someone becomes, fill in the blank. And she said, well, a couple of things happen. The camera finds you out. So there's that. And you say the wrong thing about the wrong person at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And the walls start closing in. You don't know why, and no one will ever tell you, but they do. You didn't sleep with the right people. You didn't play nice with the right people. For a woman, I mean, it's, I don't know how any of those women survived.
Yeah.
But it's incredible to see like who gets the breaks and who doesn't. And so, and sometimes, like William Holden, as she was saying, because she knew him, she did Executive Suite and others, she knew him very well, that sometimes they have the self-destruction built in. So with him, it was alcoholism, and he just couldn't fix that. And others, stardom. Obviously, I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but when you see it firsthand, the whole idea of people who are messed around with before Hollywood ever gets to them, when they ever get to Hollywood, and nothing that happens for them in Hollywood helps to bring out the better nature or their better angels.
Yeah.
Sometimes people are just awful, and if they don't make hits, then out they go. If they do make hits, Hollywood will put up with anything. But if you slip a couple of times and you're difficult, you're gone.
It's funny because literally the second episode I was on of this podcast, because it was started before I joined it, was the Oscar. And that was and that was a case of because the first movie I did was Boom. And that was a case where this was this famously bad movie that I love John Waters, and it was John Waters' favorite movie, and I had somehow never seen it. But then after that, I was like, well, now the other one I have to admit is my cinema shame that I haven't seen at this point is the Oscar, and that was specifically because I had read about it in Bad Movies We Love, and I just knew this is a movie that clearly I have to see at some point in my life, and it was a case of at that point it was just so hard to find, and then
we didn't oversell it, did we?
No, it's amazing. It's truly if you go back and listen to that episode, because I think we ended up doing, I think it's ended up like a 2-hour episode just on the Oscar alone. When Milton Berle gives the standout performance in a movie, you're watching something special.
I thought Elkie Summers' wig gave the outstanding performance.
Oh yeah. Well, now we talked about how upset I kept getting by how he basically was insulting Elkie Summer, and literally the most attractive woman he's ever seen, and he's treating her like garbage. It's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, look, that didn't help Stephen Boyd.
No,
at all, and and who knew? Who knew? I mean, had this hot young screenwriter Harlan Ellison.
Yeah,
and. It seemed like, I think they thought it was going to be like the Vincent Minnelli movie, The Bad and the Beautiful.
Yeah.
I think they thought it was going to be kind of elegant but really nasty people.
Almost like the dude version of Valley of the Dolls, because Ellison also worked on that. And...
Yeah. That's the pairing of all to me, the Oscar and Valley of the Dolls and if you can stand a triple feature, maybe The Lonely Lady with Pia Zadora.
100%.
It is, to me, knee-slappingly funny.
Yeah, no, 100%. This is why I love Bad Movies We Love so much, because this is exactly the kind of cinema.
Well, and thank you for saying, and thank you for realizing that Ed and I both loved those movies.
Yeah,
it doesn't mean, and it didn't mean then, that we weren't affected by them. It doesn't mean that we didn't cry. I mean, he and I had very different reactions to things, but it came always from a place of genuine affection.
Yeah,
for seeing people that we sometimes love go really horribly astray. But maybe you can believe. I was going to say you couldn't believe, but maybe you can. The letters that we got. I mean, the hatred that people spewed, and sometimes from big household name directors. How dare you criticize a movie directed by King Vidor?
Yeah.
well, how can you watch Gregory Peck and Jennifer Jones crawl across the desert in lust and not go, oh, please. But, different strokes. Doesn't mean we didn't love it.
Exactly, 100%.
But
so,
you see, but that was one of the reasons that I almost didn't want to write this book. I wanted to write it for my father because I knew I wished I'd written it when he was alive, but I didn't. But I wanted to write it for him because of the struggles he had as a person and as a laborer, and the kind of life that he was able to make for me and my mother. But I was resistant because I kept saying, I can't have any fun with this movie. There's nothing to have fun with.
Yeah.
Except when I got into it, there was so much gossip and infighting. It was just like, okay, this is like every movie set. There are monsters. There are really bitchy people. There are everyone stabbing each other in the back. Everyone.
Well, it's funny because then you go from Psycho, where someone literally stabs someone, to Valley of the Dolls, where it's everybody, out for themselves, stabbing them in the back, and then to On the Water. Because that was actually what I was trying to do yesterday after watching that. It was like, what is the through line, like, between these three films that you've dedicated all this time and research to? I was like a part of me was sort of like I went to recheck the IMDb on Valley of the Dolls. It's like, is Martin Balsam in that one too? Like, is that the secret? Like, but I think you just nailed it. Like, that sort of,
Henry Bellamy. He would have been good.
Yeah.
The theatrical agent. Yeah, well, I don't know if you want to psychoanalyze me. The next book that is coming out next year is Strangers on a Train.
Yeah, no, that seems like a good progression from here, from On the Waterfront, with but also from, obviously Psycho. I mean, to
there's no stabbing in it.
Yeah. And I've always been curious about Hitchcock's inclination to cast his own daughter, especially in something where she's going to get murdered, and like what sort of the Freudian aspects of that.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people bark up that tree and sound ridiculous. The truth of that is that he didn't want to cast her. He didn't even think of her for the role. Her agent, who was Montgomery Clift's agent, when a bunch of big said to him, how could you have not noticed that you have the perfect Barbara? I mean, you raised her. He didn't see it. He didn't think she was right for it, and he auditioned her. He screen tested her. Also, he didn't want her to be tarred and feathered with the nepotism kind of thing. He didn't.
Which is funny, because the only two things I think of her being in are Psycho and Strangers on a Train.
Yeah, and she's in stage fright a little bit, but as a baby. But yeah, I mean, she's. I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen her or spotted her, but I must soon. She's actually in the Ten Commandments.
Was she?
As I don't know, as God only knows. That's a hilarious movie in so many ways, but yeah, I mean, she's quite good and funny in the movie, and so that worked out nicely for her.
But yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to that now, because
well, that one's a bit of a barn burner, I have to say.
Yeah, no, I can see that.
There was a lot going on that set, and I think when I wrote the Psycho book, there was a big controversy about whether Saul Bass directed the shower scene, and
well, wasn't that just all coming from Saul Bass, or was there actual
No, and I asked everybody, and not in a way of, hey, let's get Hitch, or let's give Mr. Bass his due. I just asked, who directed you, Miss Lee?
Yeah, it's like Mr. Hitchcock was the one who was on set.
So what was he doing? Smoking a cigar and going out for lunch? No. So I hate to tell you, but one of the most famous scenes in this movie, Strangers on a Train, has its own story. Like, people are going to go, oh my God. only the evidence is a little more conclusive this time. Yeah. But that's the thing that you find with these great movies. Sometimes the director wasn't there that day.
Yeah.
Sometimes your co-star chose not to be there that day, like the famous taxi cab scene where, Mr. Brando and Mr. Steiger are doing their scene, and it's time for Brando to go to a psychiatrist, and he goes, bye.
Yeah.
And he just left Rod Steiger in the lurch, and he never got over that. He was so pissed.
Well, Rod Steiger was such a, gentle, understanding man. I mean,
Oh,
obviously.
yes. Yes. Yes.
That was
Milk of
actually
human kindness flowed through his veins.
that was the one thing I noted. It was like I was like, is this the most restrained Rod Steiger performance I've ever seen? Because I was waiting for one of those like Rod Steiger moments, and it just never comes.
It doesn't come, and thank goodness.
Yeah.
I think his performance is really nice.
Yeah. No, it's
Really, really nice. And he had just been offered a contract. Well, he'd just been offered the lead in the movie Marty, and of course he could have played that beautifully. Not,
Yeah.
I mean, Ernest Borgnine played it wonderfully too, but but he had done it. He had done it for television, and Burt Lancaster and his producing partner said, "Well, we're taking a real chance on you because nobody knows who you are, and this is a small movie, and it's going to be produced for like no money, but it's going to be big for you, so we want you for a contract." And he wouldn't do it, so he talked himself out of that one. But I mean, with the waterfront scene in the taxi, Rod Steiger had to do it with Bud Schulberg at one point, and if you've ever seen Bud Schulberg interviewed, he had a terrible, terrible stammer. I mean, crippling at sometimes. That's not easy to do.
Yeah.
I mean, that throws off your timing. And Steiger talked about that. What that is like. And then when that wasn't working, he did it with the script girl. That's not easy, but
No.
you don't see it, you don't feel it, and you shouldn't. But I mean, for those who want to know really what happens when they're making a movie, it's not like, oh, it must have been glorious every day because the movie is glorious. It's a bunch of people coming from home in terrible weather conditions.
Yeah.
Working for very little or no money. Sam Spiegel not paying people, just like Trumpian in that way. Just, yes, I'm going to give you a chance to have a magnificent painting. Sam Spiegel had a world-class art collection, and always promising people they would pay them in a world-class masterpiece. Never happened. Of course, Frank Sinatra plays a big role in the story of Waterfront because he was going to play Terry. And if I've ever felt sorry for Frank Sinatra before, and I haven't much, knowing what I know and thinking he was a brilliant talent, it happened this time because I think he was promised he's literally promised the role and came in for costume fittings and all of that. And anyway, it's quite a story about how he got sidelined.
Yeah, I'm trying to
imagine. Kneecapped, basically.
I'm trying to imagine. Like, with Sinatra, I feel like he would have been all swagger. Like, I don't, because like the thing that's great about Brando's performance is it weaves back and forth between like having this confidence, like knowing like how hot he is, while at the same time knowing like that he could have been a contender, like that he really is. He didn't meet the like sort of the destiny that he should have had. And I feel like I'm not sure that Sinatra could have pulled off that back and forth.
It's interesting that Kazan and Schulberg thought he could. I mean, they really thought, and he was from Hoboken, and the movie is set in Hoboken. He knew that world certainly.
Yeah,
they were really confident in his ability, and I'm not them.
Yeah.
So and I don't know what they saw or what Sinatra was like in those meetings. He clearly convinced them that he could do it. It's quite a story when he runs in the book. I mean, I was going to say it's going to make an incredible scene, and I need to shut up and stop saying that because anyway, but it is going to make an incredible scene when whoever they cast as Sinatra and Sam Spiegel meet at a restaurant after all this has gone down. It's pure gangster movie, 1930s.
That's what I was going to ask. Like when you brought up Spiegel again, is after all the studios rejected it like twice, what was it that made Spiegel go, okay, I'll be the one who makes this movie?
Damned if anyone ever knew. I mean, the thing was that they'd been turned down by everybody, and basically Fox was still paying their per diem at at several hotels because they moved around.
Yeah.
They had to. They were getting thrown out. Then Fox stopped paying, and they just got drunk and wrecked an office at Fox and stole paper and stole typewriters and stuff like that. And then they just holed up in their suite. I think at this point they were at the Chateau Marmont. And Spiegel had the suite across the way, and he just had a party that never ended with the most beautiful women in Hollywood floating in and out.
Yeah.
And lots of the men and everyone having a wonderful time. He was very offended that Kazan and Schulberg, these machas, were not coming to the party. And he kept after them, like, who the fuck do you think you are? Everybody wants to come to my parties. And finally they relented, but they were depressed. They were on their uppers. And anyway, they didn't come to a party, but because they were leaving to go to New York because Kazan was like, well, if they're not paying anymore, we're not staying.
Yeah.
So they're literally going to fly back to New York the next day and lick their wounds and figure out what to do. Because Kazan at this point was, look, if I have to shoot this with a 16 millimeter camera, I'm going to do it. But he didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
Because you don't get Grace Kelly with a 16 millimeter.
Yeah.
But anyway. So basically, Spiegel could see that these were two really talented guys who needed a break right then, and so he said, "Come the next morning, tomorrow morning, and read me the script." He said, "I'll leave the door open. You just walk in." Kazan is already on his way back, and Schulberg was taking a later flight, and he went in, and Spiegel is laid out like a pharaoh. He just looks like he's dead under this white sheet. And he's like, come in. And Schulberg thought he was like near death or drunk or something. And he read him the script. He wasn't even sure if the guy was listening. He gets to the middle of it and goes, I'll do it. I'll do the movie. They kept asking him why. And he would say things like, well, you guys needed a break, But then he screwed them 6 ways to Sunday on the contracts.
Yeah.
Made sure that everything went into his pocket, just as he had done to Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart on The African Queen. They never got paid, not a dime. They never got their salaries. And and he pared this one down to like no budget. Basically, this is a no budget movie. This is guerrilla, if you want to say, guerrilla filmmaking. Nobody was ever sure they were going to get paid, but they thought they were going to do something that was interesting and better than the kind of thing they were usually offered. And so they all did it. But the movie turned out to make so much money that it bought Sam Spiegel everything, a yacht, a beautiful place in Mayfair in London. So, there was no profit. There was never any profit. Of course there was. But, they both, Kazan and Schulberg, just fell in love with him because it was hard not to love him. There's a guy that was so outrageous and so unrepentant, and so bigger than life and such a womanizer. I mean, geez. The stories are, the movie is serious, although Brando makes it very funny in many ways. But the life behind the movie is very real and very raw and to me very human, very, very funny, and full of characters. Like just if they hadn't existed, he would have had to have written them.
Well,
one
of the reasons why I love watching like older movies, especially from this era, is that I always like, my working theory is that every movie is a documentary about the making of itself. And so when you actually have someone go in and look back at all of the details and the making of, that just adds to that sense of like things you may have noticed in the film and never really understood. And then you find out that, oh yeah, no, those two actors absolutely hated each other. And all of a sudden the scene makes sense in a way that it didn't before. And I think that's why I really love these kind of books. And this, like, I was probably like, we'll cap it off. But my one question is like, like you're working on a movie that is literally 70 years old,
Yeah,
and you like literally the only surviving cast member at this point is literally 100 years old. Like, what kind of effort did it take to actually, get these details and to like get these stories in a way that
really
might
is.
have been easier with the other films where like a lot of the participants were still alive.
Yeah, it was uphill every day. However, one of the great sources of kind of you are there material that some people never look at is what did the people who were making that movie say about the movie as they were making it,
Yeah.
especially in a time when yes, the publicists were keeping a lid on Brando. His sexuality was always kept, sort of, it was an open secret in the world, but it was a real secret in Hollywood. But Eva Marie at that time was raw. I know I keep using that word, but
Yeah.
immediate. And the things that she says or said then are really vulnerable and never sounded like that again. And Brando too, like a boy, just like a boy. I hope people will like me, and so there are, there are really some interesting sources of terrific material. And then, I had the good fortune of talking with Arthur Miller, who was the writer at one point for quite a long while. And we were supposed to talk about something else, and we did, but we really talked about this. And
Yeah.
so I kept, all of that documentation and what he said and, how he felt being pressured by Harry Cohn at Columbia and Sam Spiegel to make the villains of the piece commies, as opposed to American,
Yeah.
union members and union thugs and gangsters who had them under their thumb. So, those voices sounded very loud to me when I started discovering those manuscripts, and I went everywhere to find them, and some of them were very deep, but I'm really persistent. I'm a really good reporter.
Yeah.
But that's what, that's the gamble that I take. I want to tell a good story, and the making of every movie is not a good story,
Yeah.
at least not to me.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, what was wonderful, and I learned so much. I mean, as you know from my past as a movie line writer, I wrote a lot of cover stories besides bad movies we love.
Yeah.
And sat through a lot of bullshit that people spew, and I can tell when someone's talking from their heart. And I used to be a therapist, so you add that and watch out for me. But when someone is saying something that is real and is coming from a deep place, it's so clear because it's usually not articulate. It's usually fumbling, and in those days. Newspaper people would often let those people sound like they sounded. And so I think those will be kind of revelatory in a lot of ways to hear people with lofty reputations sound like people. Even Marie Saint talking about crying every day on the set, just like crying on the way back, and like, oh, get a grip. And then you go, oh, now I understand what that means and why that was going on. I always think, my family is really, is really lucky. I come from a big Portuguese, French family, and they were all only moderately interested in movies. So I was always the freak. Yeah. But I know what stories they like. I always know what grabs them because they're people, and people like to know about people struggling, whether they're struggling with their own sense of inadequacy, whether they're struggling with real psychiatric problems, as a number of people on that movie were, whether they're struggling because they're very career minded and they're not getting what they think they deserve. And I think those things are universal.
Yeah.
And there are people who just wanted to be loved appreciated. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. When I started writing and I started hearing the people, and I started shaping the story. I say scenes because they lay out so clearly as a narrative, and the struggles are so immediate, and because of the political climate that we live in, the movie feels prescient, but it also feels like right now in certain ways. So I had a good time. I had a really good time. I had a better time writing Valley of the Dolls because I was laughing every day.
Oh yeah.
Except when I was writing about Sharon Tate, and then it was unbearable.
Yeah.
Or writing about Judy Garland and writing about Susan Hayward, where those.
You just brought up something that I actually have, was kind of curious about but how did you feel about the ending of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
I'm sorry, the ending of
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
I thought it was ludicrous. I thought it was ludicrous. I think any.
I'll say it's my favorite ending in film history.
Well, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan. Did I think the character of Sharon was treated with respect and love and affection? Yeah, I do. But I also think she was minimized. She was a lot more interesting than that, and a lot more intellectually curious than that. She wasn't just twirling in her room in a pretty dress.
Yeah.
And I thought Margot Robbie was terrific. So it has nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah.
And I think that anything, it's a personal thing for me, that anything that minimizes people's struggles or minimizes their death because of wish fulfillment does them a discredit, because they suffered. They suffered. And did I want to see those deaths portrayed? Absolutely not. Did I want to? But I mean, if it made people feel nice. But when I talk to some young people who've seen the movie and think that Sharon Tate lived a nice long life, then I just go, well, it's not.
Well, and I think that's because I know one thing I am happy about sort of the pandemic COVID years was the rise of reaction videos where people will watch a movie and post their reaction to watching it on YouTube. And I find them fascinating, because seeing how people actually react to movies that you've watched, 100 times, and they're seeing it for the first time. Like one of the most memorable ones I remember, or memorable I've seen, are people watching Psycho who actually don't know the twist of Psycho. And you actually see how much that movie actually works. Whereas like I grew up in a world where like everybody knew the twist of Psycho. So by the time I finally saw it, I already knew it. And like I know like a couple of reactors, I know like they say like, oh, I'm gonna watch Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I'm like, you have to know the history. You have to know about the Manson family, and you have to know what happened to Sharon Tate, or otherwise the ending is meaningless. Like to me, like the reason why I love the ending as much as I do is because I do like the idea of using cinema as a weapon against the mistakes of history. That instead of like blandly like replicating what actually happened, actually using it as a tool to say like, no, this is how it should have happened. And I think that's why it's like Tarantino has done that with shooting Hitler in the face in Inglourious Bastards, and the sort of the ending of Django, where like a slave is basically destroys an entire plantation. Like I think stuff like that is stuff I totally I was one of those things where I was completely sympathetic to people who were sort of, I felt that it did Sharon a disservice. But for me personally, it was sort of like, well, that's the life that she should have had, and I like that someone gave her a chance to sort of like for us to see it and experience it.
Yeah. Did I think the movie was good? Yeah, I think it was brilliant.
Yeah.
But that's not what you asked me.
So. Yeah, no, 100%. I totally appreciate that. But yeah, and because I had counted a bunch of people who felt the same way you did. But like for me, like I can't remember like the last time I was in a theater and felt like that level of like emotion about like, yeah, no, that's what I wanted to see.
Yeah, I think a lot of that movie is brilliant. I mean all of the stuff about the Tex Watts and all of that stuff is just, it's incredible.
Yeah.
It shows how good he is.
Yeah.
And the sheer pleasure of hanging with Brad Pitt in that role.
Yeah.
It's just a joy.
Yeah.
It's just a joy. And Leo is really good. I mean, there's so much about that's really good. I knew that was coming. I mean, I knew that the ending was coming. But yeah, I mean, revisionist history is not my thing at all. I don't want to see a story about Hollywood where Black people had it really easy.
Yeah.
They got to be really big stars because they were so talented. No, it didn't work out like that. Or Asians who deserve to be stars because some of them were just brilliant. So that kind of thing really rubs me the wrong way. But yeah, I mean, I'm big on glamour. But I'm kind of a stickler for, especially when a director that I was working with said, I'm really not interested in what happened. I'm not interested in research. I'm not interested in history. And that's how nice for you.
Yeah.
How nice for you. So what am I doing in this room? I can give the Douglas Sirk, sort of artificiality thing. I know how to do that. I know how to write that. I know how to live that. I love it. But I don't think it's the right approach for every movie.
Well, no, of course not. Yeah. But also you're a journalist, so it makes sense that you're sort of you want the truth to be given. Yeah. I mean, I feel like writing a whole book about the making a movie is an act of journalism. I mean, that to me is
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. But I like that critics usually talk about my work as cinematic.
100%.
And so I like that aspect when people recognize that that's something that I do and enjoy doing.
I'm honestly waiting for the moment where there's an announcement that Dolls, Dolls, Dolls is the latest Ryan Murphy production, because it has all the hallmarks of a feud style film. Like I think, I don't know if you remember this, but you did a Skype interview once that involved a bunch of people, and I asked you a question, and my question was like, would you remake Valley of the Dolls, or would you make a version of the making of the Valley of the Dolls? Because I feel like that would be the much more interesting film than the actual like replication of Suzanne's novel.
Yeah, I'm with you. They've been trying to remake Valley of the Dolls like forever, and I've never thought that was interesting. Although I was brought in at one point to talk about that, and they asked me how I would begin the movie, and they loved it, but they wanted that outrageousness. But you can't write outrageous, and I don't think I think the thing to do is, if you can find a cast that you can convince that you're taking it very, very seriously, and you want them to like go for an Oscar, and pull the rug out from under them. That's fun, because then they're not winking at the audience, and they're not camping it up. They're just camp. I think it would be very, very difficult to do a movie of Valley of the Dolls, a remake, with anything but drag queens, because I think that's what people expect. However, telling the story of those women as they're making the movie, one of them dealing with breast cancer, another one dealing with multiple personalities in many ways, another one dealing with repressive sexuality when she was a person who lived life on her own terms, and I love her for that. Well, I mean, there's another of them who was suffering from the blacklist, and had to watch herself held her. And you watch Lee Grant in a movie, and she's always holding herself in such tension. Like any minute she's going to shatter. That to me is an interesting. Well, from your lips to God's ear, or Ryan Murphy's ear. We shall see. All I can tell you is that it's under contract, and we'll see where that goes.
Who knows?
But it will be a rip snorter, I can tell you.
Yeah. Of your book so far, like I wouldn't have picked Hitchcock, although I really enjoyed that film, but I feel like Dolls, Dolls, Dolls is the one that is the most cinematic. And I feel like if you enjoyed this conversation, then you definitely owe it to yourself to search out Stephen's books. They are truly, like you said, they are very cinematic. They read like stories. They and they are filled with sort of the kind of details that if you are a movie nerd, you will be, sharing them for the rest of your life with people like, oh, did you know that? Did you know that? Like that's the real fun with them. And I'm so grateful that you were willing to join us for this conversation. It was
delightful.
I really
had a
enjoyed
great time.
Thank you.
I thank you for asking me. And the first review has come in on the Waterfront book, and guess what? Every book I've written, they've called meticulous, and this happened again. So I guess I'm meticulous. But Publishers Weekly said that people who love cinema will be enthralled.
Yeah.
So you may not believe that you will be enthralled by the making of On the Waterfront, but
based on this conversation, I absolutely believe it. And like I say, like I look forward to reading that and listening to the audiobook at the same time.
Well, thanks. Yeah, this was a lot of fun. I really appreciate your inviting me, and I'm glad that we had a one-on-one. I think that was a great thing to have happen. Although I missed your co-hosts, but.
Yeah.
Haha, I'm that co-host. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Cinema Shame podcast. If you'd like to contact us, feel free to send us an email at cinemashame@gmail.com or find us, as I said, on Blue Sky. Allan is House of Glib, and I am James David Patrick. Gird your loins, because our next episode is the 1964 Shamedown, the final Shamedown of the 2024 calendar year. So tune in next time to hear Allan say,
even though, as has been established, Diane Baker is right fucking there.
You have chosen wisely.